Oh man, what the hell? All right. Look, what's going on here? It looks like I'm some sort of action figure here, and if I'm in a weird scenario, chances are that this is another unanswered questions video. Great, I knew I put that on hiatus for a reason. Well, look, if I'm sticking with the formula for this stuff, I suppose everything will go back to normal if I just answer these damn questions. But I don't even know what the episode is.
I can answer that.
Oh, hey, it's John Waters. What are we doing, Mr. Waters?
You're answering questions about the Puppet Master movies.
I should have figured. Oh, okay, well, let's get into it. Question number 1.
What's the deal with the time frame?
So the Puppet Master movies are rather notorious for their weird time thing going on, but there's actually a fairly rational answer to it all that's straight from the creators. First, let's go over what the issue is. The first film begins back in what it says is 1939, and we see Andre Toulon killing himself as a pair of dark-clad Nazis, I almost called them men, but Nazis aren't men, are honing in on his location. From there, the film then jumps into present day and deals with what happens when they find the puppets after being lost for 50 years. But then, in the second film, we see Toulon's gravestone out back, and it says that he died in 1941, not 39. So there's already an issue. The third film continues that snarl by setting itself in 1941, 2 years after he was meant to die in the first film. But at least it matches up with the second. The confusion is furthered in part 5 when Rick says that Toulon died after the war, but that would be in 1945, years after his death in either scenario. It's even more complicated when we get to Retro Puppet Master, since the intro of that one takes place in 1944, and Toulon is in hiding, not dead. So that seems to match what Rick said, but not the scene from part 1 or the gravestone in part 2. But wait, it gets sillier by the time that we get to Axis of Evil, part 9, because they show Toulon's suicide again, and the footage there is back to saying 39. But in the film, the US is involved in the war, which they wouldn't have been in that year. So, what's the deal? What is that year? Well, apparently there's a very clear answer, and it's 1941. All of it. When they made the first film, the intention was to have Toulon kill himself in 1939, but when it came time to do sequels, they decided to instead to make a prequel and set it in World War II. That at one point was going to be a small scene in the second film, but they ended up elaborating on that and making it the entire third film, but they represented that change in part 2 to reflect it. Later on, in Retro, when they showed the 1944 date, it was simply a mistake. One that's been acknowledged by those involved to just be a mistake, and was meant to also be set in 41. Now, considering that Rick said Andre died after the war, it seems like they were trying to back this up, but it's also not like he had first-hand knowledge, so it's likely just a mistake on his part. But then, when it gets to Axis of Evil, it goes back to saying 39. But they're simply recycling footage from the first film, and the date title is coded into the image, so it was either they would have to shoot a new establishing shot, or just go with the footage they have and have it be the wrong date, and Full Moon, being cheap, decided on the latter. So, how it really pans out is this way. In 1941, Toulon uses the magic of the puppets to get revenge on the Nazis for killing his wife, and then goes into hiding. He stays there, but then later in the year, the prologue of Retro Puppet Master happens, and he eventually makes his way to America, where he ultimately shoots himself. Parts 3, the wraparound of Retro, and the intro of 1 are all in 1941, so just ignore the text image and roll with that, and it all makes perfect sense.
All perfect sense.
Question number 2.
I have a question.
Oh, hey, it's Flash Gordon. What do you got, Savior of the Universe?
In that intro, there's an unfamiliar puppet. What's his deal?
So, in that whole bit where Andre is doing the pistol fellatio, we meet this little guy, and he's on the lookout here, and then after this little bit, he's never seen again. Just gone. Out of the franchise. I mean, he makes another appearance in Axis of Evil, but it's just this footage again. So, where did the little fella go? Well, he's Khan, and in terms of the films, this is the only time that we see him, and his disappearance is completely unexplained. He's put into the box with the others, but I guess that the next time that we would see him is when Danny took the box home, but for some reason, he revives the other puppets, but not Khan. No one knows why, but I'll just throw it out there that Danny's probably racist. But real quick, the puppet wasn't given a name by the creators of the film. It was just meant as a one-off side puppet that didn't matter. But fans being fans decided to name him. At first, it looked like they were rolling with calling him Shogun, but then one of the wikis went with Shredder Khan, and that seemed to be the one that stuck. For a while afterwards, it seemed like that would be his unofficial title, but then, when a comics company called Action Lab put out a Puppet Master series, we learned a whole hell of a lot more. First of all, there he was given an official name, and he was designated as Khan, dropping the Shredder part because he wanted to avoid being confused with a member of the Foot Clan. In that series, which I'll reference a number of times as we go further into this episode, it's discovered that right before the events of the first Puppet Master movie, the main part of it as opposed to the intro flashback, we discover that Neil is responsible for his absence. It seems that before inviting all those folks up to good old Bodega Bay, he did a test run by letting the puppets run rampant in a nearby sorority house, killing the girls so that Neil could use them as test subjects. However, Khan went overboard and chopped his victim up so much that her body was unusable, and Neil then figured out that the puppet did it intentionally, a form of rebellion to try to stop the experiment. Because of this, he was punished by the Puppet Master by draining all of the elixir out of him, rendering him inert once again, and he'd remain that way through the franchise. Question number 3.
Hey, can I get in on this?
Jesus. Yeah, sure. It's alive, baby. Go for it.
What happened to Megan?
One of the main characters of the first film is Megan Gallagher. She was the wife of Neil Gallagher, the main villain, and it was her family that owned the Bodega Bay Inn. She met Neil and they fell in love, eventually getting married, and it's insinuated that it was merely his ploy to work his way into her life to gain access to the hotel and the puppets. Neil found them and started his experiments and such, leading up to the events of the first film, in which he faked his own death to get a group of paranormal experts and psychics up to the inn. There, Megan met Alex, and the two would have their own little thing sparking out of them. But soon it became clear that Neil isn't as corpsey as he seems. After the puppets slice and dice him, Alex leaves the hotel, and it's shown that Megan has become the new Puppet Master. However, in the second film, it's said that she's dead and that her brains have been pulled out her nose, mummy style by Blade's hook. It was those brains that were used to restore Andre's dead body to life. But that doesn't make sense, right? Like, she was the Puppet Master at the ending of the first one, so why wouldn't they listen to her commands like they did for Neil? Well, first of all, they didn't. They killed that guy. But also, the ending of the first movie doesn't exactly show her to be the Puppet Master. She doesn't interact with them at all. In fact, it's simply shown that she was able to restore her dead dog to life, so she likely just figured out Toulon's secrets, as opposed to straight up becoming the leader of the little guys. So they have no allegiance to her and are operating on their own at this point. This is slightly contradicted by the Action Lab comics, which show the puppets serving as protectors of Megan afterwards, killing a young man who was trying to get revenge on her for firing him from the hotel. It's likely that both scenarios could exist, and that they chose to operate under her for a while until growing restless and decided that they needed a true puppet master to lead them, and chose to restore Andre. Although this partially goes against the idea that the puppets are generally good and only do evil when they are directed by an evil master. So, I think in this context, it's clear that they aren't. It seems their natural state is one of killing and not caring, unless they are under the guidance of a puppet master using them for good, as opposed to evil. Side note, there's also a couple of short comic book series from Eternity Comics way back in the interim between the first and second movie, which are no longer considered canon. There, the puppets murder Alex and come after Megan, who has abandoned the hotel to escape the evil there. They catch up to her, but Megan is able to trap them in a burning house, seemingly destroying them while she survives. During the course of this story, it's also revealed that she's related to Andre Toulon, but this particular set of books is rendered non-canon. Question number 4.
Hey, it's my turn now.
Oh, hi, Finger Puppet Werewolf. What do you got?
Why is Toulon evil in part 2?
The second film is a bit of an anomaly when it comes to Andre. In the first movie, we don't really get a feel for him. He seems pretty nice, but he's also played by William Hickey, who doesn't exactly exude a warm and friendly vibe, but I would call him neutral at this point. The third film is the one that establishes him as this kind and gentle old man, firmly on the side of good, but also not above a bit of good old-fashioned bloodshed when revenge is on the cards. This is the version that carries forth afterwards. When he appears as Decapitron, he's a good guy through and through, and again in Retro Puppet Master. But then there's that second movie, in which he's the Invisible Man, or at least dresses like him. But he's also very firmly evil there. In it, he's restored to life by the puppets, using the same elixir that gives them life. He and the crew then kill off a bunch of people and wants to transfer the soul of Carolyn, one of the crew of investigators at the hotel, into a life-size puppet to be with him forever. The puppets get mad that he used them and attack and kill him again, but the question remains, what happened to his personality? When he comes back as Decapitron just a couple of movies later, he's reverted back into his good self and makes no mention of this iteration of himself. So is this some sort of different Toulon? Well, there's an answer here as well, and again, it's one that's provided by the Action Lab comics. In the series, we're given a good amount more time to spend with the puppets themselves and have their stories fleshed out, and we learn exactly why he was bad. It seems that while he was dead, his literal brains rotted. Seems that the elixir could restore quite a bit of functionality to him, but it couldn't quite restore all of his mental faculties, causing this warped morality. He's even seen in the comics apologizing to the puppets for the way that he acted at that time, once he was in Decapitron form with no brain rot. Apparently, the writer of Part 2, David Pabian, agrees with this and confirms that that's what happened to the character. Question number 5.
I have the next one.
Bimo? Bimo? I mean, come on. That sounds nothing like Bimo.
Oh, I just play that part on the show. All my dialogue is dubbed over.
Makes sense. What's your question?
What happened to the Camille Doll?
The second film introduces a fun and quirky character named Camille Kenny. She's a psychic and is eccentric and also loves her drinks. She's part of the group that is invited up to the hotel to figure out what the deal with the place is, and she's one of the first to encounter the little guys roaming around. She tries to get everyone to leave, but no one listens to her. Before she can get the hell out of Dodge, she's attacked and taken away by Jester and Pinhead. We don't know what happened to her for a while, but her son comes to the inn to try to find her, and oh boy, he does. He finds her stuffed in the dumbwaiter with her throat cut. After the puppets rebel against Toulon, it seems like they decide that they need a new leader, and Jester uses the elixir to put her soul into the dummy thing that Andre had created to place Carolyn's into. The last we see of any of them is the whole crew loaded up into a truck and headed off to an institute for mentally troubled tots and teens. But then, we never see her again. I mean, at least in the films. And her fate is never revealed, as is the events at the institute. So what happened there? Well, the movies never address it, but guess what? The Action Lab comics do. There, we actually get to see the aftermath of what happened after Part 2. We go to that institute for mentally troubled tots and find out that Camille was going to terrorize the kids there, but the puppets refused and ended up leaving her behind to go back to the hotel where they would end up residing until being woken up in the fourth film. The comics would then go on to show what happens when they go back and encounter first a woman pretending to be Camille, killing people there, but then the actual Camille dummy itself, which would go on to become one of the main villains of the series. Question number 6.
I'm not sure it can get any weirder, can it?
Depends.
Yeah, I spoke too soon. Go ahead, Brood Kid.
When does Curse of Puppet Master take place?
So, this is one that's pretty hotly debated. After Part 5 was deemed the final chapter, it seems like there weren't going to be any more entries. But then, of course, there were. But when the film finally arrived, it was quite different than anyone was expecting. It wasn't at the hotel. Rick was no longer the master. Leech Woman was present, even though she had been killed in Part 2. Decapitron and Torch are both absent. All of these things seem to be out of place with the timeline that they had presented. Because of these inconsistencies, fans have been torn on exactly when this film is meant to be set. Some believe that it's set between the first and second films, since it doesn't feature Torch yet, nor Decapitron, and the fact that Leech Woman is still alive. That doesn't really explain the presence of Six Shooter though, but then others believe that it takes place between parts 2 and 4, trying to explain how the puppets got back to the hotel. I'm not really sure how this film is meant to do that though, since the film still ends with them out there on the road, so it's not like it fills in the gaps or anything. The writer of the Action Lab comics discussed this in an interview and says that it would make sense for it to occur between 1 and 2, since McGrew says that he got the crate at an auction, and it made sense for Megan to sell the puppets off after the events of Part 1, and then, after Curse, they made their way back to the hotel. He also gives an explanation in the books as to how Leech Woman is alive after 2 anyway, as she also appears in Legacy, and then has a part in the comics, and says that the other puppets revived her burned form and eventually Decapitron restored it. Now, there's a missing piece here, since Full Moon had intended to make a movie called Furnace Leech Woman that I guess would have explained how she survived, but it was never shot, so there's no new info there. But I'll admit, I'm not a fan of either of those theories, and I don't see any reason to move it around in the timeline. After all, McGrew said that he brought the crate at an auction years ago, and there wasn't much time between the first and second movies to accommodate that. Never mind that there's a literal calendar of 1998 that doesn't line up with the time frame for either of the earlier films, but there's just no need to move it around. Leech Woman is also back in Legacy and then the comics, so it's clear that there's an explanation for why she's here. So there's no need to slot this in a different place for that reason. But then Six Shooter is here, so if this is between 1 and 2, then you have to explain where he is in that one since he's not with the crew. Torch and Decap not being there is pretty to explain, since you can easily just say that they weren't in the crate that was sold off, but ultimately it doesn't really matter. This one was a standalone film that wasn't meant to be tied into the others until they did Legacy and decided to tie it in anyway. Like, if you want to place this one earlier, it works well enough. It's just not where I would really place it. But I mean,
Who am I? I mean, I'm just the timeline guy who analyzes this stuff ad nauseum. But you know, whatevs.
question number 7.
Okay, who's next here?
Me?
What even are you?
The barrels from Jaws.
Why do I even have those?
I mean, why wouldn't you?
Good point. What's your question?
When does Andre learn about the elixir?
So, back in Puppet Master 2, after Toulon is revived, there's a part where he has a flashback and remembers back to 1912. He and his wife Elsa are in Cairo and they're doing their puppet show and encounter a wizard who shows Andre a little homunculus creature that he has brought back to life, which completely stupefies Toulon and he decides to purchase his methodology for bringing puppets to life. So, at this point, it can be assumed that this is when he learned the secrets of animation, and this carries through the next several movies. However, when it got to the 7th film of the series, Retro Puppet Master, we meet a younger version of Andre, and it's 1902 instead. And seriously, this is meant to only be 10 years later than this one, and what was Thule doing during that decade to age like this? 1 minute, he's Sestero, and the next he's like a member of the Senate. But the weird part is that in 1902, he encounters a magician named Afzel, who has stolen the secrets of life from the god Sutek. In exchange for helping him, Afzel teaches young Andre those secrets, and he uses them to bring about the retro puppets. But like, which version is correct? Did he learn it in 02 or 12? So this is just another conundrum that's covered by the comic series, since it's addressed in Action Lab, that both are correct. In 02, Toulon did learn the secrets of reanimation from Afzel and did create those puppets that way. But later, in 12, when approached by the magician, he recognized a more refined version of what he already knew. He kept it quiet and faked astonishment at seeing a puppet brought to life, as he wanted to learn what this guy had to sell and went along with it. This new method was actually better and more efficient because, as we see in 02, the magic requires someone to say a chant out loud in order for it to work. Now, it's said that experts who use the magic would only need to think it and not say it, but the later films don't feature experts and still don't need to say the chant. That's because at this point, Toulon had switched to using the merchant's method, which was simpler and cleaner with no messy chanting. Question number 8.
My question now.
Jesus, what are you, like He-Man Freddy?
Yeah, you can tell that from the packaging that you didn't have the balls to break me out of.
True, guy. So, ask.
What happened to the retro puppets?
The retro Puppet Master didn't include the regular puppets, but did feature some variations on them that they dubbed the retro puppets. These ones are more rudimentary looking and are made out of wood, and I assume that the other puppets are possibly like wood as well, but these ones more obviously look like it. As opposed to the regulars, instead we meet Retro Blade, who looks similar to his later version, Retro Pinhead, Retro Tunneler, Retro Six-Shooter, and 2 new ones, Cyclops and Dr. Death. They're definitely different characters than their later iterations, though, and contain the souls of Toulon's friends from this era, as opposed to who inhabits them later. At the ending of the film, Andre and the crew are able to save a kidnapped Elsa and banish Sutek's agent, but the puppets all survive, which begs the question, what happened to them? It's a question that the puppets of 1941 ask their master, and he simply tells them that he'll tell them the story another time. But he never did, and the retro crew weren't featured again, with the exception of Dr. Death, who had his own movie in 2022. But he was solo, and it's a plot point there that he actually doesn't know where the other retro guys are. Quick mention that his movie is meant to take place in the gap between the second and fourth films, post-Zombie Toulon, but before Rick found them. But I should point out that a different story was given in the Action Lab comics. There, it was stated that they had finished the mission that they were created for, and their souls were now at rest and moved on. The puppets were then later buried out in the lawn at the Bodega Bay Inn, and apparently, something more happened after that, since the doc is still alive and causing chaos. And at some point, someone dug them up and revived them, perhaps infusing some of them with different souls, although the movie makes it clear that Death's soul is the same as from the retro Puppet Master, so it's more likely that their souls were drawn back into the puppet bodies. One other little note is that Action Lab was in the middle of a flashback story called Retro Now, which was meant to run 4 issues when the series was canceled. The final issue of the book was issue 20, and it ends on a cliffhanger, leaving that arc incomplete. The book was then given a 3-issue miniseries called Curtain Call to wrap the series up, but instead of finishing the retro story, they focused more on tying up the story threads of the modern puppets, so we don't really know what happened to these guys or where they are now, but according to Dr. Death, they're still out there somewhere. Question number 9.
I can't possibly have any more weird toys, right?
Uh-oh.
Uh-oh is right. What do you want, Faust?
How is Jester in the prequels?
We talked about the weird timeline of all these films, and it got stranger as it went on, and what's really odd is that there's 13 movies in this franchise. 14 if you count Puppet Master vs. Demonic Toys, and 15 if you count The Littlest Reich, but both of those are different continuities. But the weirdest about that is that of the 13 official entries, the furthest along in the timeline is 2003's Puppet Master The Legacy, and that movie's just a clip show. But parts 9, 10, 11, and the 2 solo films, Blade and Dr. Death, are both prequels, or movies that are set elsewhere in a timeline. But out of all of those, it's parts 3 and Retro that take place before the events of the intro to the first film. The other prequels pick up after Toulon has shot himself, but those two films take place before. But here's the weird thing. Both of those films feature Jester, one of the core groups of puppets, and he's a member of the team. But in that part 1 intro, we can see Toulon with Jester, and it sure as hell looks like he's creating him. Toulon is painting his face and then does a magic chant over him, which seems to bring him to life. So, if this is Jester being born, then how is he present in part 3 or Retro? Well, this was something that was asked of band at one point. It's pointed out that at one point in the movie, there's an old poster up on the wall for a Toulon show, and he can be seen with a Jester puppet there. So it's clear that he's been around for a while. And as for what he's doing in that intro, he's just being given a touch-up and fixing some damage that it had on him for preservation. It can be assumed that during the process, his soul needed to be shut down in a way in order to do the repairs. And when we see him doing the chant, he's restarting him. Question number 10.
This has to be the last question. Who's coming out now?
It's me.
Voodoo Doll Christy?
No, it's actually Christy. I got turned into a toy too.
What about Stella?
No, she's still like normal.
Whoa, B, don't step over here, okay? Just ask this last question, and hopefully we'll turn to normal again.
Who are the puppets really?
Over the course of the film, it's pretty firmly established the puppets are animated by the souls of humans, and they're embodiments of people that have been in Toulon's life. So, who are they? I think the most commonly known one is that of Leech Woman, since it said that she is inhabited by the soul of Andre's wife, Elsa. In the third movie, she's killed by the Nazis. Toulon brings her back in Leechy form. That movie also gives the story of the most famous puppet, Blade. There, we're shown that he's been given the soul of Dr. Hess, a German doctor who was working with the Nazis under duress and betrayed them to help out Toulon, and got killed for it. The puppet master then placed his soul into the Blade puppet, which was designed to look similar to the villainous Major Kraus. Of the core originals, the next one is Tunneler, and the origin of his soul is never given in the films, but is established in the Action Lab comics, as well as a trading card that was released by Full Moon themselves, and was reinforced in the Puppet Master video game. There, it said that Tunneler was once Joseph Sabenstein, a soldier that was forced to work in the Nazi salt mines until he died of starvation. The next of the OG squad is Pinhead, and much like Tunneler, his origins were only discussed in the comics and outside material, but he was a truck driver named Hermann Strauss. He was sneaking in food to the Jewish ghettos, and the Nazis caught him and executed him for treason, so Andre recovered his soul and placed it in Pinhead to get revenge. Of the ones that appeared in the first film, that only leaves Jester, and he's another one that had his backstory given in the comic books. He was originally Hans Siderman, and he was a bookkeeper that enjoyed jokes and pranks. Apparently, he took things a little too far with some Nazi soldiers, though, and they killed him for his jokes, but Andre brought him back as the Jester. The second film introduces Torch, and we're also given his identity in the comics, and it's one of the wilder reveals. Torch is actually the soul of Eric Toulon, the son of Andre and Elsa, but he ran away from his parents and joined Hitler's Youth Corps. At one point, he was planning to kill his father, but Blade intervened and slashed his throat, so Andre kept parts of his brain and blood in order to revive him at some point, and it looks like damaged Toulon in Part 2 finally did the deed. The third film introduces us to the last of the main crew, Six Shooter, and he's another that's revealed in the comics, although the least information is given about him. We know he's an American, a double agent that sold secrets to any side of the war with no allegiances, but how he died and how his soul ended up in the puppet are not revealed, although the video game also gives us his soul's name as Samson Pratt. Of course, the fifth movie would give us Decapitron, which was inhabited by Toulon himself, and the sixth movie didn't give us anyone new. Retro Puppet Master gives us the Retro crew, but they're not the souls of the modern versions of them, but are the souls of Toulon's fellow puppeteers that are killed over the course of the film. In the later prequels, we also meet Ninja, and he's inhabited by the soul of Danny's brother Don, who was killed by Nazis and brought back to help fight. Even Khan is given a backstory in the comics, as his soul is said to be that of a Chinese Fengtian soldier. Now, when the puppets are rebooted in The Littlest Reich, they no longer seem to be accompanied by human souls and are now just killing machines.
So there you have it. All the questions are answered. I'm sure I'll turn human again soon. Maybe after I wrap up all the spiel, like telling you to put some comments down below. Maybe I'll only turn human if you make a comment. Or maybe we'll be normal again if you like this video.
Or if you subscribe.
It's partly if you become a patron.
Yeah, that might be it. But I don't know. I could just be all over right after the video ends. I don't think we'll leave this on a cliffhanger, right? Right? I'm sure that I'll turn back to normal person any second now. Any